My name is Meghan Walsh, 30 years old, and I was sitting at my parents' kitchen table in Kansas City when my world shattered. I'd come home suitcase in hand hoping for a fresh start after my dreams of becoming a fashion designer crashed hard. The smell of roast chicken filled the air, but the tension was thicker. My sister, always the golden child with her corner office and perfect life, leaned forward, her eyes cold. "You don't belong here," she said, her voice slicing through me like a blade. I froze, waiting for someone to speak up to tell her she was wrong. But my own parents gave a small nod of approval, their silence louder than her words. My chest tightened, my hands shook, and I felt the sting of betrayal burn deep. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I stood, grabbed my bag, and started collecting my things, each step heavier than the last. That night, I walked out of my childhood home, vowing never to look back. What happened next pushed me to the edge, but it also led me to a place I never expected, a place where I found who I truly was. Stick around, because this story isn't just about being pushed out. It's about what happens when you refuse to stay broken. Have you ever been told you don't belong by the people who should love you most? Drop your story in the comments, hit that like button if this resonates, and subscribe to join me on this journey of rebuilding from the ground up. Let's dive in. The rain was relentless as I drove away from my childhood home, my sketchbook and a bag of fabric scraps tucked beside me. That night, as I left Kansas City behind, my mind spiraled back to the past year, trying to understand how I'd ended up here, cast out by my own family. 12 months ago, I was in Portland, Oregon, chasing my dream of becoming a fashion designer. I'd moved there after college, drawn to the city's vibrant art scene, hoping to carve out a place for myself. I landed a job at a small boutique stitching custom dresses and sketching bold designs late into the night. The pay was meager, $10 an hour, barely enough for rent, but it felt like a foothold. My tiny apartment was a mess of fabric swatches and pencil shavings, each sketch a step toward my own fashion line. But Portland broke me down. The boutique's owner, a frazzled woman always juggling too many orders, started losing clients. Work slowed, and 6 months ago she called me into her cramped office. "We're cutting staff," she said, handing me a final paycheck and a shrug. I scrambled for freelance gigs, taking on small alterations for local shops, but the money wasn't enough. My rent was overdue, $1,500 in the hole. The landlord taped an eviction notice to my door, giving me 3 days to clear out. I sold a few dresses and an old laptop to afford gas for the long drive that took more than a day back to Kansas City. My bank account had $75 left. I didn't want to go home, but I was out of options. I thought my family would be a lifeline. Growing up, I was always the odd one out. My sister Courtney was the family's pride, straight A's, law school, a fancy office by 32. My parents, George and Elaine Walsh, never tired of bragging about her. Courtney's arguing a big case, my father would beam at dinner. "She's set for life." My sketches, my late nights cutting patterns, got polite nods and comments like, "That's nice, Megan, but when are you getting a stable job?" It hurt, but I brushed it off. Courtney made it worse. She'd smirk when I talked about my designs, calling them cute projects in a tone that twisted my gut. At a family picnic years ago, I mentioned entering a design contest. "Stick to something realistic," she said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. My mother gave a small nod, and my father started talking about Courtney's latest promotion. I thought coming home might change things. I'd been away for years, and I hoped they'd see my effort, my passion. I packed my sketchbook, a bag of fabric scraps, and a duffel of clothes, drove across 6 states, and knocked on my parents' door, exhausted but hopeful. I rehearsed my words. "I just need a place to stay for a while, to rebuild." I pictured my mother offering a hug, my father suggesting job leads. But sitting at that kitchen table, their silence after Courtney's cutting words, "You don't belong here," hit harder than any eviction notice. The tension wasn't new. It had been there all along, woven into every family gathering, every comparison to my sister's perfect life. As I drove through the rain, my hands tight on the wheel, I felt unmoored. I'd left Portland with nothing, and now my family had turned their backs. I had no job, no home, just a sketchbook full of dreams and a bag of scraps. But deep down, something stubborn in me refused to break. I didn't know how, but I was going to prove them wrong, not for their approval, but for myself. 1 week later, I checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts of Kansas City, my bank account down to $200. The neon sign flickered outside my window, and I lay on a lumpy mattress staring at the ceiling, wondering how I'd fallen so far. After leaving my parents' house, I spent the first few nights in my car parked in a quiet lot, my sketchbook untouched beside me. The cold seeped through the windows and I rationed gas to keep the heater running. I couldn't afford to stay there forever, so I scraped together enough for a week at the motel. To survive, I took a part-time job at a fast food joint near the highway, flipping burgers for $8 an hour. The greasy smell clung to my clothes, a constant reminder of how far I was from my dreams. Desperate for a lifeline, I reached out to my college friend Heather Lane. We'd been close back then, sharing late-night study sessions and big plans. She answered my call on the second ring, her voice warm but cautious. "Come stay with us," she said, and I felt a flicker of hope. Her apartment in Midtown was small but cozy, and she offered me her couch. Her boyfriend, Brian Cole, was polite, shaking my hand with a tight smile when I arrived, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder. They were kind. Heather made me coffee. Brian shared leftovers, but I could feel the strain. I was an intruder in their space, my presence disrupting their routine. Every night as I folded my blanket on the couch, I sensed their hushed conversations in the next room, their voices too low to make out but heavy with tension. I tried to make it work. I'd leave early for my shifts, sketching designs on napkins during breaks, clinging to the hope that I could rebuild. But the weight of my situation pressed down harder each day. I had no savings, no plan, and the sting of my family's betrayal lingered like a bruise. Then one afternoon, I got a text from my old friend, Bonnie Hart. We'd grown up together, though we'd drifted apart since high school. She worked at a bank downtown and always seemed to know everyone's business. "Can we meet?" she asked, and I agreed, hoping for a distraction. We sat at a diner, sipping burnt coffee, and her words hit me like a punch. "People are talking, Meghan," she said, her eyes darting away. "Your family's telling everyone you ran away that you're a failure who couldn't make it." I gripped my mug, my knuckles white. The idea that Courtney, my sister, was spreading these lies, or worse, that my parents were letting her, cut deeper than her words at the dinner table. Bonnie fidgeted, clearly uncomfortable, but she kept going. "They're saying you abandoned them, that you're too stubborn to get a real job." I wanted to scream, to call her, and demand why they'd twist the truth like this. But I didn't. I just nodded, thanked Bonnie, and left the diner, my chest tight with anger and shame. The rumors made me feel smaller, like I was shrinking under the weight of their judgment. Back at Heather's, I tried to hide my spiraling thoughts, but it was hard. Brian's polite smiles grew thinner, and Heather started dropping hints. Small comments about their busy schedules, their need for space. I knew I was overstaying my welcome, but I had nowhere else to go. My shifts at the fast food place barely covered the motel's weekly rate, and my sketchbook, once my escape, felt like a reminder of everything I'd lost. I'd lie awake on the couch, replaying Bonnie's words, wondering if my family was right. Maybe I was a failure. But even in my lowest moments, a stubborn spark refused to die. I wasn't done yet. I just needed a chance, a way to claw my way back. 3 weeks later, I was sketching designs in a coffee shop in the Crossroads district when a woman approached me. My sketchbook was open pencil, scratching out a flowing dress inspired by the jagged edges of my recent weeks. I'd been coming to this place daily, a small escape from the fast food job and the couch at Heather's apartment. The hum of conversation and the smell of espresso gave me a sliver of normalcy, but I still felt like I was treading water. The woman, dressed in a tailored blazer and bold scarf, glanced at my sketches. "Those are striking," she said, her voice warm but direct. I looked up startled and met the steady gaze of Esther Moore, a veteran fashion designer who ran a boutique nearby. I'd heard of her. Her name floated around Kansas City's art scene, but never imagined she'd notice me. Esther sat down uninvited but not unwelcome and flipped through my sketchbook. "You've got a real eye for texture," she said, pointing to a design with layered fabrics. My cheeks flushed. No one had praised my work like that in years. She asked about my background, and I stumbled through a summary Portland the boutique job my return to Kansas City. I left out the family drama, but my hesitation must have shown. Esther didn't push. Instead, she told me about a community fashion project she was leading, showcasing local designers at a pop-up event. "I need someone with your vision," she said. "Join us." It wasn't a job offer, just a chance to contribute designs, but it felt like a lifeline. I nodded, barely trusting my voice. The next day, I walked into Esther's boutique, a bright space filled with racks of vibrant dresses and shelves of hand-dyed fabrics. I was nervous, clutching my sketchbook like a shield. Esther introduced me to her small team, two seamstresses and a pattern cutter, and gave me a corner table to work. For the first time in months, I felt a spark reignite. I spent hours sketching, pinning fabric samples, and discussing ideas with Esther. She was exacting but kind, pointing out flaws in my designs with a precision that pushed me to improve. "You're holding back," she'd say, tapping a sketch. "Trust your instincts." Her words stirred something in me, a reminder of why I'd chosen this path. But doubt lingered. Every time I drew a bold line or chose a daring color, a voice in my head whispered that I wasn't good enough, that my family was right to dismiss me. Working with Esther became my anchor. She shared stories of her own early days, rejections from big labels, nights spent sewing until dawn. Her boutique had started as a dream, much like mine, and she'd built it through grit and refusal to quit. I wanted to be like her, confident and unapologetic, but my insecurities kept creeping in. What if I failed again? What if this project flopped, proving Courtney's words true? I pushed those thoughts down, focusing on the work. The project was a group effort, but Esther gave me space to shine, assigning me a segment of the show to design solo. I poured myself into it, sketching late into the night, my hands stained with charcoal from endless revisions. Our relationship grew beyond work. Over coffee breaks, Esther asked about my life, listening without judgment, as I let slip pieces of my family's rejection. She didn't offer pity, just practical advice. You can't control what they think, but you can control what you create. Her strength was contagious, and I started to see her as more than a mentor. She was a mirror of who I could become. Still, the weight of my past clung to me. Each sketch felt like a battle against the voices telling me I'd never make it. But with Esther's guidance, I was starting to believe I could. For the first time, I saw a path forward, one I'd carve myself. 3 months later, I stood backstage at a small fashion show in downtown Kansas City, my hands shaking. The air buzzed with chatter and the clink of glasses, but I barely noticed. My first collection, 6 dresses I'd poured my heart into, was about to hit the runway. Each piece was born from the raw ache of rejection, with sharp angles and bold fabrics that screamed defiance. Esther had given me a segment in the community showcase, and I'd spent weeks stitching, cutting, and reworking every detail under her watchful eye. Now, as models prepped and lights dimmed, I felt exposed, like my soul was about to walk out under those spotlights. What if they hated it? What if I'd misread everything Esther saw in me? The music started, a pulsing beat that matched my racing heart. The first model stepped out wearing a dress with jagged black seams and a burst of crimson silk. The crowd leaned forward, their murmurs shifting to gasps. I peeked through the curtain, my breath catching as they clapped for the second look, then the third. By the time the final dress, a flowing gown with layers of charcoal and gold, glided down the runway, the applause was deafening. A local blogger in the front row stood up, snapping photos, and I heard someone whisper, "Who designed that?" Esther caught my eye from across the room and gave a small nod, her lips curving into a proud smile. For the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. After the show, people crowded around asking about my inspiration, my process. A boutique owner slipped me her card saying she wanted to stock my designs. I was dizzy with it all, barely able to string sentences together. This was it, a real step toward the career I'd dreamed of. I was no longer the girl flipping burgers or crashing on a friend's couch. But as I packed up my fabric samples, my phone buzzed with a text from Bonnie Hart. "Call me," it said. "It's about your sister." I hesitated, then dialed her number, bracing myself. Bonnie's voice was low, almost reluctant. "Courtney's in trouble," she said. "Her law firm's investigating her for unethical conduct, something about falsifying documents. It's bad, Meghan. She might lose her job." I stood frozen, the backstage noise fading to a hum. Courtney, the perfect sister who'd called me a failure, was unraveling. Part of me felt a flicker of satisfaction, a vindication after years of her smug superiority. She'd built her life on being better than me, and now her world was cracking. But another part ached. She was still my sister, and the thought of her falling brought no real joy, only a heavy mix of relief and guilt. I thanked Bonnie and hung up, my mind spinning. That night, I sat alone in Esther's boutique, the runway now empty. I thought about my parents who'd backed Courtney's words that night at the dinner table. Did they know about her troubles? Were they rethinking their judgment of me? I wanted to call them to demand answers, but I didn't. Instead, I flipped through my sketchbook, tracing the lines of the designs that had just won over a room full of strangers. Those dresses weren't just fabric, they were proof I could rise above the pain. Courtney's downfall didn't erase what she'd done, but it made me realize something: her success had always been their measure of me, not mine. Esther found me there, sketching by a single lamp. "You did good tonight," she said, sitting beside me. I told her about Bonnie's call, letting the words spill out: Courtney's investigation, my mixed feelings. Esther listened, then said, "You can't carry their mistakes. Focus on what you're building." Her words grounded me, reminding me of the path I was on. The show wasn't just a win, it was a turning point. I wasn't defined by my family's rejection anymore. I was a designer, and tonight I'd proven it to myself. 6 months after that night, I moved into a tiny apartment in the Crossroads district, my first real home in years. The space was cramped with creaky floors and a leaky faucet, but it was mine, shared with two roommates, Neil Fisher, a graphic designer, and Greg Stone, a barista. I'd signed a contract with an independent fashion label, Thread Vibe, to produce a small line of dresses based on my showcase designs. The pay, $1,500 per design, wasn't life-changing, but it was enough to cover rent and start saving. For the first time since leaving Portland, I felt a sense of stability, like I was finally planting roots instead of drifting. Living with Neil and Greg was a practical choice. They were friendly enough, splitting grocery bills and leaving notes about whose turn it was to clean. Neil was quiet, always sketching logos at the kitchen table, while Greg blasted music and told stories about quirky coffee shop customers. We got along, but I kept my distance, wary of letting anyone too close. My past had taught me to guard my heart. Family could betray you, and friends could drift away. I'd spend evenings in my room sketching new designs or refining pieces for Thread Vibe, my focus on building something that was mine alone. One morning, as I sipped coffee and checked emails, a message from my mother, Elaine Walsh, popped up. The subject line read, "I'm sorry." My stomach twisted. I hadn't spoken to her or my father since that night at the dinner table. Her words were careful, almost formal, apologizing for how things ended, saying she missed me and wanted to talk. She mentioned Courtney's struggles, but didn't elaborate. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the reply button. Part of me wanted to respond, to ask why they'd let Courtney's words define me. But another part, the part that had fought to rebuild, wasn't ready. I deleted the email, choosing silence. I needed to protect the life I was creating, not reopen old wounds. A few days later, I met Bonnie Hart at a cafe to catch up. She'd been a steady friend even if we weren't close anymore. Over lattes, she dropped a bombshell. Courtney got fired, she said, stirring her drink. The law firm found proof she'd fudged client records. It's a mess. I leaned back, processing the news. Courtney, the sister who'd always been the golden child, was out of a job. Bonnie added that my parents were struggling too. My father's construction business was slowing, and they'd taken out a loan to cover bills. The Walsh family, once so quick to judge me, was crumbling under their own weight. I should have felt triumphant, but instead, a dull ache settled in my chest. Courtney's fall didn't erase the pain of her words or my parents' silence. It just made their world seem smaller, more fragile. I thought about Elaine's email, her attempt to reach out, but I still couldn't bring myself to reply. I'd spent years chasing their approval only to realize it was a trap. My life now, my designs, my apartment, my hard-won independence was proof I didn't need it. Back at the apartment, I threw myself into work. ThreadVibe's owner, a sharp woman named Lila, pushed me to refine my designs, pairing me with a small team to prepare for a regional fashion expo. The hours were long, but I loved the challenge, selecting fabrics, tweaking patterns, watching my sketches come to life. Neil and Greg noticed my late nights and started leaving snacks on my desk. Small gestures that chipped away at my walls. One evening, Neil asked to see my latest design, a bold jacket with angular stitching. "This is legit," he said, nodding. I smiled, feeling a warmth I hadn't expected. Maybe I could let people in just a little. As I stood in my tiny room pinning fabric swatches to a mood board, I realized how far I'd come. The girl who'd driven away from her childhood home, rejected and broke, was gone. I was building a life that belonged to me, not defined by my family's expectations or their failures. Courtney's downfall and my parents' struggles were their story, not mine. I wasn't running anymore. I was standing tall, ready for whatever came next. 1 year to the day after my sister told me I didn't belong, I stood on a stage in downtown Kansas City, my designs lighting up the runway. My first solo fashion show, a collection of 10 bold pieces, had sold out every ticket. The crowd, local artists, boutique owners, and even a few regional critics watched as models strutted in dresses that blended sharp lines with soft textures, each one a chapter of my journey. The applause echoed through the venue louder than I'd ever imagined. A critic from a Kansas City fashion blog approached me afterward, calling my work fearlessly authentic. Another offered a contract to feature my designs in a Midwest fashion magazine. I was no longer just a dreamer, I was a designer recognized and respected. Backstage, as I packed up fabric swatches, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from my father, George. His voice was strained, asking to meet, saying he and my mother, Elaine, wanted to make things right. A letter from Elaine arrived at my apartment the next day, repeating her apologies and begging for a chance to talk. I read it twice, my hand steady, but my heart heavy. Their words felt genuine, but too late. I'd spent a year rebuilding without them, and their attempts to reconnect stirred more pain than comfort. I didn't call back or write. Instead, I tucked the letter away, choosing to focus on the life I'd created, surrounded by people who believed in me. That life included Esther, who'd become more than a mentor. She was family in every way that mattered. Heather, too, had rekindled our friendship, inviting me to dinners and art gallery openings, no longer just a host, but a true friend. The fashion community in Kansas City embraced me, offering collaborations and support that filled the void my family left. I called them my chosen family, people who saw my worth without needing me to prove it. Their presence gave me the strength to keep going, to keep designing, even when doubt crept in. To understand my choice to stay distant from my parents, I started seeing Dr. Vivian Tate, a therapist recommended by Esther. In her quiet office, Dr. Tate helped me unravel the tangle of emotions tied to my family. She taught me about boundaries, how to protect my peace without guilt. Your value isn't tied to their approval, she said during one session, her words cutting through years of self-doubt. I learned to see my journey not as a reaction to rejection, but as a testament to my resilience. Courtney's fall, her firing, and the financial strain on my parents was their consequence, not my burden. They'd built their world on comparisons and expectations, and it had collapsed under its own weight. As I stood in my apartment pinning new sketches to the wall, I thought about where I'd been a year ago, driving away in the rain, broken and alone. Now I had a home, a career, and a community that lifted me up. The lesson wasn't about proving my family wrong, it was about finding where I truly belonged. Blood doesn't define family love, support, and mutual respect do. I'd found that in Esther, Heather, and the artists who cheered my success. My designs were my voice, and they'd spoken louder than any argument ever could. To everyone who's followed my story, thank you for listening. Your support means more than I can say. I've learned that belonging is about building a life that reflects your truth, not someone else's expectations. What about you? Where have you found your place in the world? Share your stories, I'd love to hear them.